Jalen Hurts is a national champion.
It's unbelievable. I dreamed about this.
Jalen Hurts was runner-up for the Heisman.
Memorial Trophy.
Jalen Hurts was an MVP finalist. He's a Pro Bowler, second-team All-Pro,
and Hurts gets the standing ovation,
and has now made 2 Super Bowls. But is Jalen Hurts overrated?
I'm so proud of this guy.
Or underrated?
I had a purpose before everybody had an opinion.
With a lot of talented players around him, many NFL fans have debated whether or not Jalen Hurts is good or great, serviceable or transformational. And in order to better answer this question, we have to go back to the beginning. Jalen Hurts was born in Houston to mother Pamela and father Avarian Hurts, and grew up in Channelview, Texas, a town just outside of Houston. Jalen was immersed in football from a young age, with a father who was a head coach at the local high school, and he grew up with 2 siblings, his brother, Avarian Jr., who was a football coach just like his father, and his sister, Kennedy. Jalen attended Channelview High School, played quarterback, and was coached by his father. In his senior season, Jalen threw for just under 2,400 yards, with 26 passing touchdowns, and added another 1,400 rushing yards, with 25 touchdowns on the ground as well. Jalen also competed in powerlifting, and was reported to have squatted over 500 pounds as a sophomore. As a recruit, Jalen was a 4-star coming out of high school. And while Texas A&M tried their best to bring Hurts to College Station, Lane Kiffin, the offensive coordinator for Alabama, ultimately won out, and Jalen was headed to Tuscaloosa. As a true freshman, Hurts lost out on the starting job in summer camp to Blake Barnett, who started week 1 against USC. But by week 2, Hurts was the starter in only his first season under Saban. After he took over, Hurts was phenomenal as a freshman, throwing for just under 2,800 yards and 23 touchdowns to only 9 interceptions, adding another 954 yards on the ground, an Alabama single-season record as a quarterback, and another 13 rushing touchdowns. That season, Jalen had an incredible 139.4 passer rating, and also set the single-season total touchdown mark for the Tide, with 36, breaking Sims' record of 35, set in the 2014 season. Jalen's historic freshman season didn't stop there. He became the first Alabama quarterback to throw for 300 and rush for 100 yards in a single game, and the first Tide QB to rush for 120 or more yards in multiple games as well. As a team, the Tide rolled through the 2016 regular season to a perfect 12-0 record and a victory over Florida in the SEC Championship. Hurts won SEC Freshman of the Year, SEC Offensive Player of the Year, and led Alabama to a number 1 overall seed in the college football playoff. In the semifinals against Washington, Alabama had no problem with the Huskies, earning a national title berth with a final score of 24-7. Hurts, however, was rather pedestrian, only completing 50% of his passes for 57 yards, and only 2.6 yards per carry on the ground, with 50 rushing yards on 19 carries, as Bo Scarborough ran Bama to the championship with 180 rushing yards on 19 carries as well, with 2 touchdowns. In the national title, Hurts improved his raw passing and rushing numbers, but his efficiency through the air dipped, only completing 42% of his passes for 131 yards and a touchdown, with 63 yards on 10 carries and a touchdown on the ground. His effort, simply put, wasn't enough to get the Tide over the top, as Clemson won the game on a last-second touchdown from Watson to Renfro. The following season, Bama reloaded, and Hurts returned as a starter, leading the Tide to an 11-1 regular season, with their only loss to Auburn in the Iron Bowl. Hurts' numbers dipped across the board, throwing and rushing for fewer yards and fewer touchdowns than he had as a true freshman. Nevertheless, Alabama was loaded for bear and snuck into the college football playoff as the 4 seed, where they matched up for a 3rd time against Clemson, this time in the semifinals. In the game, Alabama got the best of the Tigers in the rubber match, with a 24-6 victory over Clemson. Hurts had better efficiency this time around, completing 67% of his passes, albeit for only 120 yards, but added 2 scores through the air and another 40 yards on the ground. In the title game against Kirby Smart, former Saban assistant, and Georgia, Hurts struggled mightily in the first half, completing less than 50% of his passes for only 21 yards, as Bama fell behind 13-0 at the break. To start the second half, Saban decided it was time for a change, and made a gutsy decision to bench Jalen in favor of true freshman Tua Tagovailoa. The decision came up aces for Saban and the Tide, as Tua threw for 166 yards and 3 scores in the second half and overtime, winning the game for the Tide on an incredible throw to Devonta Smith on 2nd and 26 to give the Tide their 2nd national title in 3 seasons. Hurts, amazingly, showed the type of teammate he was, cheering on the young freshman and his Tide teammates the entire way. If he was hurt by Saban's decision, he certainly didn't show it. And before his junior year, showed his true character, electing to stay with the Tide as opposed to transferring somewhere else. But before we get to that, a quick word from our sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by Factor 75, a nutrition company that delivers chef-crafted, dietitian-approved, fresh, never frozen meals right to your doorstep. Before Factor, I was either racking up charges on delivery and takeout or spending precious football watching time on meal prepping. Now, with Factor, a delicious, chef-prepared meal is just minutes away. It's a perfect pre- and post-gym meal, great for a quick lunch when you're on the go, and they even offer breakfast and snack options as well. The process, it's super easy. You simply take the meal out of your refrigerator, remove the box, poke a couple holes in the film, microwave, and then eat. It's been a massive addition to my day-to-day, and has taken a lot of stress out of figuring out what or where to eat. To get started with Factor, simply head to factor75.com or click the link below and use the code 50FTF to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first Factor box. That's code 50FTF at factor75.com to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. Now, back to the video. As a junior, Hurts continued to work, even after losing his starting job to Tua. Jalen still saw game action, but took this time as a backup to develop more as a passer, knowing that someday his time may come again to show how special he truly was. In 2018, Alabama completed a perfect regular season, with Tua as a starter, and faced off in the playoffs. Tua returned as a starter, leading Bama to a victory over Kyler Murray and Oklahoma in the semifinals, but losing to the, yep, you guessed it, Clemson Tigers in the national title, 44-16. At the conclusion of his junior season, Hurts had completed his undergraduate degree at Alabama, and realized that in order to get to the next level, he needed to transfer. And although he wanted to remain loyal to the Tide, it was time to make a decision to better his future. Prior to his senior year, Hurts transferred to play for Oklahoma, and more importantly, Lincoln Riley, head coach of the previous two Heisman Trophy winners, Kyler Murray and Baker Mayfield. As a senior, Hurts had his breakout campaign. He threw for over 3,800 yards, nearly 1,100 better than his previous best mark as a freshman in 2016. Jalen had 32 passing touchdowns to only 8 interceptions, an incredible 4-to-1 ratio, and added a whopping 1,298 yards and 20 touchdowns on the ground, also career bests. Jalen helped lead Oklahoma to a 12-1 record and a Big 12 title. He was a Heisman finalist, and finalist for many other season awards, which, in many years, he would have won, if not for this guy, who had arguably the most historic Heisman season in college football history. Jalen finished runner-up in the Heisman voting and many other awards to Burrow, but his accomplishment as a senior in Norman certainly didn't go unnoticed. In the college football playoff semifinals, Jalen had his chance to exact revenge against Burrow, but the Tigers were simply too much for Oklahoma, as Burrow had one of the greatest performances in college football history, and a historic beatdown of Hurts and the Sooners, 63-28. Although Jalen and the Sooners didn't have enough to beat the historic LSU Tigers, Jalen managed to complete his Masters and declared for the NFL draft. Now, it was draft time. And don't worry, we'll make a decision on where Jalen stacks up in this generation of quarterbacks. But first we have to go over how his NFL career has panned out thus far. At the Combine, Jalen performed well in nearly every test, except for his RAS size grade, which at 6'1" and 222 pounds was considered poor for a quarterback. But he was elite in the speed and explosion metrics. With an interesting college resume, many scouts and NFL execs were unsure on where Jalen fit as a prospect, and he fell out of the first round in the 2020 NFL Draft, with 4 quarterbacks, Burrow, Tua, Herbert, and Jordan Love, all being selected before him. Finally, with the 53rd overall pick, the Eagles, who had some lingering questions at the quarterback position, selected Jalen in the second round.
Jalen Hurts, quarterback, Oklahoma.
As a rookie, Hurts started at third on the depth chart, behind Nate Sudfeld, but quickly moved up to the backup role, helping the Eagles in some QB run packages. Ultimately, the 2020 season wasn't a great one for Philly. The Eagles finished 4-11-1 in the campaign, and Hurts didn't see starting time until December, when Carson Wentz was finally benched for poor play. Hurts finished his rookie season with 4 starts, finishing 1-3, and 1,061 passing yards, 6 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, and added another 354 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground. At the conclusion of the 2020 season, Doug Peterson was out as Philly's head coach, and Nick Sirianni was hired. In year 2, as a full-time starter, Hurts and the Eagles bounced back quickly under Sirianni. Jalen had an incredible opener against the Falcons, throwing for 3 touchdowns and finishing with a passer rating of 126.4. The Eagles finished 9-8 that season, earning a wild card berth, and Jalen threw for over 3,100 yards, 16 touchdowns, totaling 9 interceptions, and had 784 yards on the ground, a career high, and 10 rushing touchdowns. In the playoffs, however, Jalen and the Eagles showed that they still had growing to do. Hurts struggled, losing a fumble and throwing 2 interceptions, as Philly lost to Tom Brady and the defending Super Bowl champion Bucs, 31-15. Before year 3 of Hurts and year 2 of Sirianni, it was clear the Eagles had some work to do to get to the next level. Well, GM Howie Roseman got to work. Howie traded the Eagles' 18th overall pick to the Titans for stud receiver, Jalen's good friend, A.J. Brown. With A.J. now paired with Hurts' former teammate and 2021 first-round pick Devonta Smith, the Eagles were loaded at receiver. In 2022, the connection between Hurts and A.J. Brown was immediate, and the Eagles exploded. They finished 14-3 on the season. Hurts threw for over 3,700 yards and 22 touchdowns, both career highs to this point, and had over 700 yards on the ground with another 13 touchdowns. Hurts made the Pro Bowl, was a second-team All-Pro, and the now famous tush push had officially worked its way into the spotlight. On the play, Hurts would drive forward on a QB sneak, with All-Pro center Jason Kelce bowling over defenders in front of him and his teammates pushing behind him. The Eagles were incredibly efficient on the play, converting a first down at a staggering 93% clip. The tush push was crucial to the Eagles' success in the regular season and would continue to help them in the playoffs. In the divisional round, the Eagles walked over their hated division rival, the New York Giants, 38-7, and in the NFC Championship, rolled over the quarterback-depleted Niners as well, 31-7, to make it back to the Super Bowl for the first time since their miraculous 2017-2018 campaign. Hurts was solid enough in the first 2 playoff games, but in the Super Bowl, Hurts really shined. Philly and Hurts jumped all over Pat Mahomes and the Chiefs. Hurts kicked off the Super Bowl scoring with a touchdown on the patented tush push, added another 45-yard touchdown pass to his favorite target, A.J. Brown, to take a 14-7 lead, then answered a Chiefs fumble recovery touchdown with a touchdown of his own to take a 21-14 lead, and then finally added another field goal before the break. In the second half, however, the Chiefs came storming back, scoring 2 touchdowns on their first 2 drives, with a Philly field goal sandwiched in between. The score was now 28-27 Chiefs. After Philly failed to score on their next possession, Mahomes and the Chiefs added another touchdown, taking an 8-point lead, with 9 minutes left in the fourth. But Hurts and the Eagles answered. Jalen led an 8-play, 75-yard drive, which he capped off with his 3rd rushing touchdown of the contest, and converted the 2-point conversion as well, for the Octopus, knotting the game at 35-all. But the Chiefs, seasoned by 2 Super Bowl performances and a Lombardi of their own, answered the bell again, with a 12-play, 66-yard drive, capped off by a Harrison Butker field goal that left only 8 seconds on the clock. Hurts' Hail Mary attempt came up short, as did the Eagles' Super Bowl aspirations, as the Chiefs won their 2nd Super Bowl with Mahomes under center. Coming off Super Bowl losses, teams often struggle to find their footing, but this wasn't true of Sirianni, Hurts, and the Eagles, at least in the early going. The Eagles had lost both of their coordinators, and Sirianni replaced with Brian Johnson on offense and Sean Desai on defense. The coordinator moves didn't seem to impact the Eagles too much early on, as Philly won their first 5, dropped a game to the Jets in Week 6, but then rattled off 5 more wins for an awesome 10-1 start to the season. But then, things went off the rails. Philly struggled down the stretch, with rumblings of issues in the locker room, the coordinator hires, and questions about Sirianni swirling, as the teams lost 6 of their final 7 games, with the lone win coming against the Giants, and suffered a blowout loss in the wild card round to the Baker Mayfield-led Bucs, 32-9, a game in which Hurts actually played fairly well, at least according to his quarterback rating, with a mark of over 100, but the Eagles failed to get much of anything going on the ground, rushing for only 42 yards on 15 carries as a team in the game. Hurts actually had a career year that year in passing yards and touchdowns, but threw 15 interceptions, and the lack of a super strong ground game really plagued the Eagles down the stretch. It was clear to Howie Roseman that once again, changes needed to be made. In 2024, Roseman brought in Saquon Barkley to help Jalen. Sirianni hired 2 new coordinators to replace Johnson and Patricia, who took over after Desai was fired in Week 14. He brought in Kellen Moore on offense and veteran Vic Fangio on defense. The offense, with Barkley now in the fold, drastically improved. Hurts only threw for 2,900 yards this season, but was efficient, with career marks in both completion percentage and passer rating, as well as a 3-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio. Saquon ran for over 2,000 yards, and the Eagles' defense has been stifling, their first year under Fangio. In the playoffs so far, the Eagles shut down the Packers' offense in the wildcard round with a 22-10 victory, and had another gutsy performance against the Rams, at which Saquon went crazy in the divisional round, leading the Eagles to their second conference championship appearance in 3 seasons, with Hurts under center and Sirianni as head coach. Against division rival Washington in the NFC title, the Eagles' offense and Saquon went off, putting up 55 points in a blowout victory over Jaden Daniels and the Commanders for yet another Super Bowl berth against, the Chiefs. Now, before the big game, let's talk about Hurts and where he ranks. In only 4 seasons as a starter, Hurts is a second-team All-Pro and a 2-time Pro Bowler. He's the best running quarterback in the game, outside of Lamar Jackson, and is solid through the air. With so much talent around him, is he overrated in the eyes of NFL fans, or underrated? Well, where does he rank amongst his peers? By the eye test, there are only 4 quarterbacks who are widely considered better than Hurts: Mahomes, Allen, Jackson, and Burrow. Let's see if the numbers tell the same story. By statistics, we'll compare each player to Jalen using StatHead, starting from their sophomore seasons, as Hurts wasn't a full-time starter in his first year. Let's compare the 4 seasons as full-time starters after year 1 to get an idea of how Jalen ranks up against these quarterbacks by the numbers. As expected, Mahomes clears Hurts in every passing category, while Hurts performs much better than Pat in nearly every rushing category. Still, overall, Mahomes has 3 more Super Bowl rings, a higher approximate value, aka AV, the single number metric StatHead uses to compare players across years and positions. And Mahomes is also better in every other award/honor category. After Mahomes, believe it or not, things start to get a lot murkier in these comparisons. Jackson has the sole MVP in the compared seasons, which Hurts obviously does not, the first-team All-Pro compared to Hurts' second-team All-Pro, as well as more passing touchdowns and a higher quarterback rating. But Hurts has 2 more Super Bowl appearances than Jackson, a team metric no doubt, but not an insignificant metric to keep in mind, as well as a higher AV. And while Lamar has been awesome in the few seasons since then, the comparison over this time frame is a lot closer than the narrative may indicate, and is closer to a wash than a win for Jackson. If anything, an argument can clearly be made for Hurts, given team success in the playoffs. Well, what about Burrow? The 2 were drafted in the same draft, after all. In only a 3-game difference, Burrow blows Hurts out of the water in every passing category. Burrow also has a Super Bowl appearance of his own, and 2 Pro Bowls, just like Hurts. But Hurts, well, he blows out Burrow in all the rushing categories. Jalen's got the All-Pro nomination, and 2 Super Bowl appearances to Joe's 1. And in probably the most surprising statistic of them all, AV, Hurts is way better than Burrow, with an AV of 71, compared to only 56 for Burrow. In what many may consider to be a highly favorable conversation for Burrow, it's probably a wash, and may even be a W by the numbers, awards, and honors for Jalen. Lastly, Allen vs. Hurts. This one may turn some heads as well. Nearly a complete wash. Awards and honors are identical. Allen has the better passing numbers, Hurts has the better rushing numbers, slight AV edge, and 2 more Super Bowl appearances. Wow. To be honest, when making this video, I wasn't sure what to expect, or what the conclusion would be, but these comparisons are, well, eye-opening. After conducting this exercise, it's fair to say that Hurts, by the numbers, has established himself as a top 5 quarterback in the league. Now, let's look at the national media narrative, and see if Hurts is overrated or underrated in the eyes of the pundits. Chris Sims, the famous QB guru who does his top 40 quarterback countdown every season, had Hurts at 25th before 2022, which is fair, considering he had his breakout in 2022, and then at 7th in 2023, after the Super Bowl appearance and breakout campaign. The 4 quarterbacks that we mentioned previously as well as Herbert, yikes, and Lawrence, double yikes, were ahead of Hurts. In 2024, Sims had Hurts again behind the 4 quarterbacks mentioned, as well as Stafford, Herbert again, Stroud, and Prescott. Interesting. Well, what about other news outlets? Well, Fox Sports put out an article before the 2024 season that had Hurts ranked 10th, behind the other quarterbacks mentioned before, except for Herbert, who didn't even make the list, but also put Aaron Rodgers and Brock Purdy above Hurts in this ranking. But, to be fair, had Hurts at 5 in their 2023 edition. NFL.com writer Nick Shook had Hurts ranked 10th prior to the 2024 campaign. PFF had Hurts 9th in the May of 2024 article. And Nick writes Mahomes Mountain, well, we're not even going to talk about whatever the heck that is. Now, looking at the numbers and comparing it to rankings from NFL pundits, as well as discourse across the NFL world on X, it's hard not to believe, at least at this point, Hurts isn't at least slightly underrated, if not completely. Jalen, by the numbers, has been, well, very, very good, if not great, since he took over as a full-time starter in 2021. And it's hard to pin down why exactly he doesn't generate similar buzz to Allen, Burrow, and Jackson. Listen, Mahomes is Mahomes. We're not going to put anyone into that category. Regardless of what you think of the guy, he's going to go down as the greatest of a generation. But as for the other quarterbacks in Hurts, well, it's a lot closer than the experts might lead on. Sure, Philly may have put a lot of talent around him, but is that really his fault? He still manages to accomplish everything and more of what is asked. Now, what will this year's Super Bowl performance and result do for how he's thought of and his legacy? Well, with a win, it will do a whole hell of a lot. And with a loss, well, it's hard to say for sure. But one thing we can say before the game, as of now, is that Jalen Hurts is a high-level quarterback, and if anything, is underrated. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, if you enjoy football stories like these, click the link in the description to subscribe to our weekly newsletter, where we'll be sharing more football stories and discuss weekly football news in both college and the NFL.